The national epic of Mesopotamia is the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it tells the story of Gilgamesh, the king of the city of Uruk, and a number of adventures that he has. The story begins with Gilgamesh being something other than a very good king. He's a giant. According to the story, he's 18 feet tall and 9 feet wide, and he's 2/3 god and 1/3 man. And he's not a terribly good ruler. And so I'm going to read some excerpts from the Epic of Gilgamesh for you. The poem begins with the people of Uruk crying out to the other gods, saying, "Is Gilgamesh the shepherd of Uruk? Is he a shepherd, bold, eminent, knowing, and wise? No, Gilgamesh does not leave a girl to her mother, the daughter to the warrior, the bride to the young man. He does not leave a son to his father. Day and night he arrogantly takes them away." So we've got this sense that the people of Uruk are kind of frightened and angry at Gilgamesh. On the one hand, he seems to be stealing all the girls and taking all the young men and leading them off into battle. And so what do the people of Uruk do? They pray to the gods and say, "Make us somebody who can protect us from Gilgamesh." And the gods decide to do so. They create a man, a hairy man, the text says, called Enkidu. He's a wild man. He's also 18 feet tall and 9 feet wide, and he is kind of the opposite of Gilgamesh in many ways. Whereas Gilgamesh is an urban-dwelling man, Enkidu is a wild man. He runs with the gazelles, he eats grasses with the animals, he jostles at the watering hole with them, and he drinks water. It's kind of funny that they say he drinks water, because of course what do civilized men drink? Civilized men drink beer, whereas the wild man drinks merely water. Well, Gilgamesh hears about Enkidu and decides to do something a little tricky. Instead of going out and fighting the wild man, which is what the gods and the people of Uruk want, he decides to tame Enkidu. And the way he does it is by sending a local prostitute out to go meet him. So he sends a trapper along with the harlot Shamhat, and they set off on a journey to go find Enkidu. And it says, "They found Enkidu, the animals arrived and drank at the watering hole. The wild beasts arrived and slaked their thirst with water. Then he, Enkidu, offspring of the mountains, who eats grasses with the gazelles, came to drink at the watering hole with the animals." And at this point, Shamhat, the harlot, the prostitute, goes out and tames Enkidu. It says, "Shamhat unclutched her bosom, exposed her sex, and he took in her voluptuousness. She was not restrained, but took his energy. She spread out her robe as he lay upon her. She performed for the primitive man the task of womankind. His lust groaned over her. For 6 days and 7 nights Enkidu stayed aroused and had intercourse with the harlot, until he was sated with her charms. But then something happened. Now that he'd had sex with Shamhat the harlot, when he went back to go run with the gazelles and play with the other animals, they ran away from him. Because in some sense, by coming in contact with this woman, Enkidu became civilized. Well, now that he's civilized, he ends up becoming friends with Gilgamesh, and the two of them become, for lack of a better word, superheroes. They go around the ancient world, fighting monsters, righting wrongs, killing demons, and then one day they accidentally kill the Bull of Heaven, who was the friend and pet of one of the ancient Mesopotamian gods. And so, in punishment, the gods decide to kill Enkidu. And as he's dying, he describes to Gilgamesh what he sees, his vision of the afterlife, of the underworld. And it says, "Then I was turned into a dove," this is Enkidu talking, "so that my arms were feathered like a bird. Seizing me, he led me down to the house of darkness, the dwelling of Irkalla, to the house where those who enter do not come out, along the road of no return. to the house where those who dwell do without light, where dirt is their drink. Their food is of clay, where like a bird they wear garments of feathers, and light cannot be seen. They dwell in the dark, and upon the door and bolt there lies dust. And then here is what I think is one of the most profound lines in ancient poetry. He says, "On entering the house of dust, everywhere I looked, there were royal crowns gathered in heaps. Everywhere I listened, it was the bearers of crowns who in the past had ruled the land, who now served the gods as slaves." So contrast this to the Egyptian vision of the afterlife, where a king, the pharaoh, after he dies, continues to be a king, becomes Osiris, a god in the afterworld. Here, for the Mesopotamians, when their kings die, they go off and become the lowest of servants and slaves, just like everyone else in the underworld. Well, Gilgamesh can't handle it. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh decides that the purpose of his life should be to find a way to cheat death, to escape from death, because he doesn't want to die. So he goes on a quest to find immortality, and he travels all over ancient Mesopotamia. He finally finds one man who is immortal, a man named Utnapishtim. And Utnapishtim survived the Mesopotamian version of the Great Flood, and as a reward, the gods gave him immortality. But Utnapishtim says to Gilgamesh, it was a one-off deal, right? Gilgamesh can't get to be immortal, only Utnapishtim is. But Utnapishtim says, I know you came a long way, you traveled all this way, I ought to give you some hope. And so he says, there is one thing that could help you. All right? He says, there is a plant, and if you eat of that plant, it will make you young again. It won't give you immortality, but it will stretch your life out twice as long. So Gilgamesh hears this, and he goes into the water, and he goes all the way down to the bottom of the ocean, and he finds the plant, and he picks it, and he carries it back up, and he's very proud, and he's holding it, and he shows it to his companions, and he says, this plant is called Old Man Becomes Young Again, because it's a plant that's going to make Gilgamesh young, or at least he hopes it will. But Gilgamesh decides not to eat it right away. He wants to take it back to Uruk and eat it in front of the whole town so they all can see him transforming into being a young man again. And about halfway back in his journey, he realizes he's tired, wants to take a bath, and so he stops at a little river, and he jumps into the river to take a bath, and he lays the plant down on the ground. And what happens while he's bathing, a snake comes by, eats the plant, sloughs its skin, becomes young again, and then wiggles away. And at the end of the poem, Gilgamesh does not succeed, he doesn't win. At the end of the poem, Gilgamesh cries, sits down and weeps. And this, I think, tells us a lot about ancient Mesopotamian society and its values. On the one hand, what's the moral of this story? I would say it's that, nothing lasts forever. Right? But what I want you to do in this discussion forum is to think about other things we can tell about Mesopotamian society and their attitude towards life and the gods if this was the national epic, the poem that they taught to all their children, and the story that was at the centerpiece of their society.